If you grew up in the US, you've probably heard these warnings. That butter is bad. Better use margarine. Don't eat too many eggs. Limit fat and choose low-fat options. All of it was sold as health advice. Americans did exactly what they were told. They cut fat, they avoided traditional foods, and they trusted modern replacements. But history shows something strange. People followed the rules, and the health outcomes they were told this would prevent still happened. Heart disease stayed high. Obesity rose, and metabolic illness became more and more common. So, what if none of this advice was actually true? Because some of the most trusted health recommendations in American history were never true, and still aren't. They were built on weak studies, corporate influence, and political pressure. One of these health recommendations was even linked to hundreds of thousands of heart attacks in the United States alone. And even today, many of these beliefs are still stuck in people's heads, long after the evidence behind them collapsed. So in this video, we're breaking down the 5 biggest food lies in US history, where they came from, who benefited, what happened when millions of people followed the advice, and what the data actually shows once the claims are stripped back to the evidence. Lie number 1. Butter is unhealthy. For most of human history, butter was just food. Then, in the middle of the 20th century, it suddenly became dangerous. The shift began in the 1950s and 1960s, a period when heart disease was rising rapidly in the United States. Hardening of the arteries was said to account for around 90% of heart disease, and in 1955, President Dwight Eisenhower suffered a heart attack, putting fear on the front page and turning the search for a dietary culprit into a national obsession. Scientists and institutions were under pressure to find a clear cause, something simple that could explain a growing health crisis. Into that moment came the diet-heart hypothesis, promoted by scientist Ancel Keys. The idea was straightforward. Saturated fat raises cholesterol. Cholesterol clogs arteries. Clogged arteries cause heart attacks. Keys' 7 countries study appeared to support this narrative. Countries that consumed more saturated fat, including butter, showed higher rates of heart disease. To policymakers and the public, this looked like strong evidence. The logic felt intuitive. Fat in the diet, fat in the blood, fat in the arteries. By 1961, the theory moved from academic debate into official guidance. That year, the American Heart Association urged Americans to cut saturated fat and cholesterol, and to replace them with cholesterol-free vegetable oils. Butter was effectively pushed into the avoid category. Once the message became official, it didn't stay in medical circles. In 1984, publications like Time magazine helped cement the narrative, turning a scientific hypothesis into public belief. What almost no one questioned was a crucial detail. At the time these recommendations became dogma, the hypothesis had never been tested in long-term clinical trials. There was no experimental proof showing that cutting butter would actually prevent heart attacks. But the message came from authority, and it sounded scientific. Repeated often enough, it stopped sounding like a theory and started sounding like fact. Then came the domino effect. Governments rolled out low-fat guidance. Doctors were trained to fear fat. Food companies swapped fat for sugar to keep products tasty. Consumers were told cholesterol was the enemy, and low fat became a synonym for healthy. By the 1980s and 1990s, the war on butter had become a full-scale, low-fat craze. Butter consumption dropped sharply as people believed they were protecting their hearts. But the promised payoff never arrived. Heart disease stayed America's #1 killer and still is. Even more striking, obesity rates climbed during the very years when fat was being aggressively removed from the diet. Quietly, researchers began to revisit the assumption that butter was the villain. In 2014, a major analysis covering 78 studies and roughly 650,000 people delivered a blunt conclusion. Lowering saturated fat did not reduce cardiovascular disease risk. Replacing it with polyunsaturated fat didn't either. In short, cutting butter had not produced the health benefits people were promised. Eventually, even nutrition experts softened the message. The original claim had been oversimplified. Not all fats were harmful. Natural fats like butter, consumed in reasonable amounts, were not the public health disaster they were once portrayed to be. Some evidence even suggested that refined carbohydrates, not butter, played a larger role in worsening health outcomes. So why did the butter myth survive for so long? Because once a health message becomes official doctrine, it is incredibly difficult to reverse. The original warning was loud, absolute, and endlessly repeated. That's how the first food lie took hold. Lie number 2. Margarine is heart healthy. As butter was pushed out of the diet, something had to replace it. That replacement was margarine. Made from vegetable oils and marketed as cholesterol-free, it appeared to perfectly fit the new guidelines. Health organizations actively encouraged people to switch. The message was blunt and confident. A medical news article in 1974 summed it up clearly.
Down with eggs and butter, up with polyunsaturated vegetable oils and margarine.
What almost no one understood at the time was how margarine was actually made. Early margarines were produced by hydrogenating vegetable oils, a chemical process that turned liquid oils into a solid, butter-like spread. That process created something entirely new in the human diet: artificial trans fats. Those trans fats gave margarine its texture. They also turned out to be far more dangerous than the fat found in butter. By the 1970s, some scientists were already raising alarms. But the warning came too late. Margarine had been crowned heart-healthy, and millions were consuming it daily under medical advice. In the decades that followed, the evidence became impossible to ignore. Trans fats raised bad LDL cholesterol while lowering good HDL cholesterol, a combination that aggressively damages arteries. Margarine wasn't protecting the heart. It was actively harming it. A 2006 analysis estimated that trans fats were responsible for up to 1 in 5 heart attacks in the United States each year. A public health disaster, made worse because people were eating margarine precisely to avoid butter. Eventually, reality forced a reversal. Cities like New York banned trans fats, and heart attack rates declined. By 2018, the United States federally banned artificial trans fats in foods. Modern margarine was reformulated, but by then, the damage was done. If you spread butter on your toast in the 1980s instead of margarine, you may well have been better off. That's the second food lie. Not just wrong, but deadly. Lie number 3. White bread is superior. For centuries, white bread wasn't just food, it was a symbol. Long before nutrition science existed, white bread meant status. Flour that was finely sifted and free of brown flecks looked cleaner, softer, and more refined. Producing truly white flour was labor-intensive and expensive before modern milling, which meant only the wealthy could afford it. The poor ate coarse, dark loaves. The rich ate bread that literally looked pure. That visual difference created a powerful assumption. If it's white, it must be better. White bread became associated with cleanliness, safety, and progress. Brown bread was seen as rough, inferior, and old-fashioned. That perception didn't disappear with time. It followed white bread straight into the industrial age. Well into the 20th century, food companies leaned heavily into this belief. Industrial white bread was advertised as modern and scientific. In the post-war era, sliced white loaves like Wonder Bread were marketed as wholesome, advanced, and superior to traditional whole-grain bread. For many people, the conclusion felt obvious. White bread wasn't just softer and tastier, it was healthier and easier to digest. Nutrition science eventually showed the opposite. Refining wheat into white flour removes the most valuable parts of the grain. The bran, rich in fiber, is stripped away. The germ packed with vitamins and healthy fats is removed. What remains is mostly starch. As one article put it, white bread is nutritionally similar to pixie sticks, essentially refined sugar. The body breaks this starch down into glucose almost as quickly as pure sweets. The losses are substantial. Compared to whole grain, white flour contains far less fiber, protein, vitamin E, B vitamins, magnesium, and other essential nutrients. The consequences appeared early. In the early 20th century, deficiency diseases like pellagra and beriberi began to emerge, forcing governments to intervene. The solution wasn't to abandon white bread, it was to enrich it. Vitamins were added back artificially to compensate for what milling had destroyed, but even enriched white bread never recovered what whole grains naturally provide. Whole grain bread behaves very differently in the body. Its intact fiber slows digestion, leading to a lower glycemic response than white bread. That steadier blood sugar curve supports better metabolic health. Large population studies consistently link whole grain consumption to lower risks of heart disease, stroke, type 2 diabetes, and even longer lifespan. The belief that white bread was superior didn't survive contact with evidence. It was a myth, born from status, reinforced by industrial marketing, and protected by the illusion of purity. Today, dietary guidance has flipped. Nutrition professionals consistently recommend making at least half of all grains whole. White bread may still be familiar, but the idea that it was ever better has been dismantled. Lie number 4. Sugar is harmless in moderation.
Enjoy in moderation.
For decades, that sentence protected sugar. Parents were told a little candy was fine. Kids were told soda wasn't a problem if it wasn't excessive. Sugar wasn't poison, just empty calories. While dietary fat was being aggressively demonized in the late 20th century, sugar slipped quietly under the radar. That wasn't accidental. In the 1960s, some scientists began pointing to sugar as a possible contributor to heart disease. That's when the response came. Not from neutral researchers, but from the sugar industry itself. At the center of it was the Sugar Association, an organization backed by roughly 142,000 producers, processors, and refiners of sugar beet and sugarcane products. This wasn't a small lobbying group. It was the economic engine of American sugar, and when sugar's reputation was threatened, it didn't stay passive. Behind the scenes, the industry financed research designed to redirect blame. The Sugar Association paid the equivalent of more than $48,000 in today's money to Harvard-affiliated nutrition researchers, including doctors Frederick Stair, Mark Hegsted, and Robert McGandy. The goal was specific: shift responsibility for coronary heart disease away from sugar. That review was published in 1967 in the New England Journal of Medicine, one of the most prestigious medical journals in the world. From that point forward, the narrative was set. Sugar wasn't dangerous, it just needed moderation. That message became embedded in dietary guidelines, advertising, and everyday advice. Then came the real-world experiment. As fat was removed from foods, sugar rushed in to replace it. Low-fat cookies, sweetened yogurts, fat-free snacks packed with added sugar, all marketed as sensible choices. Consumption skyrocketed. In the United States, average added sugar intake rose to about 77 grams per adult per day. That's roughly 20 teaspoons, or nearly 60 pounds per person per year. That's close to the sugar content of almost 2 cans of Coca-Cola every day. The consequences followed. Obesity rates surged. Type 2 diabetes exploded. Today, medical consensus looks very different. The idea that sugar is harmless in moderation no longer holds up, because sugar is easy to overconsume and extremely difficult to regulate in a modern food environment. High sugar diets are now linked to increased risks of heart failure, fatty liver disease, insulin resistance, and certain cancers. What's often forgotten is that some scientists warned about this decades ago. In 1972, British researcher John Yudkin published a book titled Pure, White, and Deadly. He argued that sugar, not fat, was the real danger. At the time, his work was dismissed, mocked, and sidelined. Industry-friendly narratives won. Now we can see the lie clearly. Sugar was never harmless in moderation, because moderation assumes control, and sugar was introduced into a food system where control didn't exist. It wasn't limited to desserts. It wasn't an occasional indulgence. It was built into everyday food: bread, sauces, cereals, snacks. So when people were told sugar was safe in moderation, they were being given advice that could not be followed in real life. Not because people lacked discipline, but because the environment was engineered for constant exposure. And that's why the lie, sugar is harmless in moderation, became one of the most damaging food beliefs in history. Lie number 5. Calories are all that matter. This lie wasn't about food. It was about thinking. For decades, health was reduced to math. Count calories, eat less than you burn. Nothing else matters. A calorie is a calorie. That phrase shaped an entire generation. It didn't matter where calories came from: soda or salad, candy or carrots. If the number stayed low, health would follow. The food industry adapted instantly. 100-calorie snack packs, diet sodas, low-calorie desserts. People were told they could eat almost anything, even junk food, if they stayed under a limit. At the same time, real food was feared: nuts, avocados, eggs, too many calories. The idea sounded scientific. Calories do matter. Energy balance is real. But here's the lie. Calories are not all that matter. The body does not process all calories the same way. Different foods trigger different hormones. They affect hunger differently. They change metabolism differently. 2 foods can have identical calories and opposite effects. 200 calories of soda spike blood sugar and insulin, then vanish. 200 calories of almonds digest slowly, reduce hunger, and often lower total intake later. Same calories, different biology. Long-term data made this undeniable. Harvard researchers followed over 120,000 people for 20 years. People who ate more refined grains, sweets, and sugary drinks gained more weight, even without extreme overeating. People who ate vegetables, fruits, whole grains, nuts, and minimally processed foods maintained healthier weights naturally. Their conclusion was blunt. Calorie is a calorie does not tell the whole story. Processed foods are engineered to override appetite. Soft textures, fast eating, hyper-palatable design. Whole foods regulate hunger without constant willpower. Calories also say nothing about nutrition. 100 calories of cookies and 100 calories of yogurt look identical on a label, but behave nothing alike in the body. Focusing only on calories pushed people into diets that were technically low-calorie and metabolically damaging. It fueled restriction, rebound hunger, and yo-yo dieting. Today, guidance has evolved. The message is simpler and harder. Don't just count calories. Make calories count. A 500-calorie fast food meal does not behave like a 500-calorie home-cooked meal. Your body knows the difference, even if the label doesn't. Calories matter. But pretending they're all that matter led us badly astray. And that is the fifth and final food lie.